I want to talk to you about the coolest thing about Ernest Hemmingway. So, do you guys remember the pandemic? Yeah. So, lockdown, right? Lockdown happened, lockdown number 1. Everybody was like, oh my God, we have to do this properly, we have to stay at home. But no one wanted to waste the time that we had our hands, so lots of people were trying to do new things, right? Sourdough. Who here tried sourdough? Yeah. I was watching a lot of documentaries, and I learned how to knit. Mostly because when you knit, it is physically impossible to doom scroll on your phone. So that was really useful in the first few weeks of the pandemic. It did become a bit of an obsession, and I am afraid that I am now the sort of horrible aunt who comes and gives you itchy sweater, and then you have to wear it every time she visits. But nevertheless, lockdown number 1 was very productive. I was very proud. Lockdown number 2, don't know about you, I was not having it. I was not productive. Most of the time, I was just watching old episodes of Gilmore Girls. If you don't know Gilmore Girls, it's a great TV show from early 2000s. If you do know Gilmore Girls, I hope that you are Team Jess. Yeah, Team Jess, of course. But anyway, as great as Jess is, my lockdown number 2 was not productive, and it was not intellectually stimulating. So when lockdown number 3 came around, I had a whole pandemic to learn how to use the clicker, and I did not. Lockdown number 3, I decided I need to give myself a goal. And I decided that I will become a Hemingway completionist, because it sounded great, and I remembered that I used to like his novels when I was a teenage girl, apart from Jess and Hemingway. But I read his novels and I read his short stories, and I really liked it, so I wanted to see what else he did. So, long story short, he has written a lot about hunting and a lot about bullfighting. And I think I will forever consider it one of my finest achievements that I have actually made it through the 45 pages of descriptions of the shoes that bullfighters wear when they fight the bull. But I did do it, and as I was reading the sort of lesser-known non-fiction, he keeps mentioning Mrs. Hemingway, right? Mrs. Hemingway. And it's a bit tricky because you never know which one it is, right? Because... oh, screw it. Because he had 4. And just for the record, all 4 of them were really amazing women. And Hemingway, being a genius writer, he was a really shitty husband, and he did not deserve any of them, just for the record. But I was reading about them, and I got really interested in Martha Gellhorn, who's the third one, the third wife. And actually, my friend Matt, who is sitting here in the audience, gave me her book, and I got really into it. And I realized I just love her, and she's so much cooler than Hemingway, and I want to tell you all about her, but I only have like 10 minutes, so let's make it really, really quick. Martha Gellhorn was born into a very long line of really great women. Her mom and her grandmother were members of the Wednesday Club, which was a women's group in St. Louis, which did a lot of social work, and it was campaigning for women's rights and for a right to vote for women. So Martha actually grew up going to protests, and she was very socially aware. And then when she grew up, she became a journalist. And one of her first bodies of work was this series of reports about the impact of the Great Depression on people, and it was really, really influential, and it made its way to the White House, and she really kind of showed the suffering of the people. But she was drawn to go abroad, so she became a foreign correspondent and a war reporter. That's when the trouble started. So when she was in Spain covering the Spanish Civil War, she met Hemingway, and he was already very famous and married, but they got together, and he convinced her to move to Cuba with him, and she did. And they got married and lived in Cuba. But the war was happening in Europe, and Martha was getting really antsy about it, and she really wanted to go and cover the war because that was her job. So she did go to Europe, and she was doing a great job reporting for the Collier's magazine, which was at that point one of the most famous magazines in America. And she was doing it, and Hemingway was like horrible, shitty husband. He kept moaning that she abandoned him. At one point, he sent her a telegram saying, "Are you a war correspondent or a wife in my bed?" Which apparently you can't be both, I don't know. Anyway, she came back to Cuba and was there with him for a bit, but she was really drawn to Europe, and he kind of realized, okay, maybe she has a point. Something is going on in Europe, so I should go too. So she was really excited, and she arranged for a plane ticket for him and her to go back to Europe. They get to the plane, Hemingway gets on the plane, and she is told, "Oh, hold on, no women on this plane, like, you're not going." So Hemingway jets off to Europe. She gets on a Norwegian cargo ship that's loaded with dynamite and crosses the Atlantic that way. Makes it to London. At that time, Hemingway's already there for a week. He's like partying, holding court, because he was really famous at that point. So she's like, "Oh God, terrible." She checks into the same hotel, but a different room. There you go. And she continues her work. At which point, Hemingway, who is really famous, decides that he needs to find a magazine or a newspaper that he would write for. And guess which one he picks? Right, Collier's. So he basically takes her job away from her, which is really shitty because at that time, each magazine, each newspaper could only have one accredited journalist in the sort of war journalism media bubble. So she essentially loses her job and accreditation, and Hemingway is writing for them. So D-Day comes around, and Hemingway is given a spot on one of the ships, and he's there with all the generals and all the big people. And Martha is once again told, "Sorry, no women, absolutely not, you stay in London." What does she do? She drives to the dock, she sneaks onto a medical ship and locks herself in a bathroom. Now, ladies, I don't know if you've been in that situation, locking yourself in the bathroom. This one proves to be really, really good choice for her, because she stays in the bathroom for a couple hours. Next thing she knows, she's right in the middle of the action. So she's on the medical ship, she's reporting, but she's also helping, translating, comforting soldiers as they come in shot into pieces. Terrible situation. She actually makes it on one of the little boats and lands in Normandy, helping, again, carrying stretchers and helping with people. And she becomes the first, and for a really long time, the only journalist who landed in Normandy on that day. She writes an amazing piece from that. Meanwhile, Hemingway is on the ship at the back of the fleet, and he can't go anywhere near the action, which is very frustrating for him because he sees himself as a bit of a soldier as well as writer. So he really wants to go, but he's not allowed. He can watch it with his binoculars, as you see in this picture. And he also writes a piece that is sort of backseat driving, and talks a lot about himself and about how he essentially told the captain where to land. And how he was basically instrumental in the battle. He never makes it ashore because he's not allowed, because journalists were not allowed. And he files his story. So we have Martha's story, which is frontline action packed with human tragedy, and Hemingway talking about how great he is. Guess which one made it onto the front page? Yes, it was Ernest. It's a great story, but it's just not as good as Martha's, if I may say so. Martha at that point is like, oh, whatever. She goes on, reports on the war. She's one of the first journalists to reach Dachau when it was liberated. And she divorces Hemingway, the only one of the 4 wives who actually left him. All the other ones he left for the subsequent wife. And she spends the rest of her life reporting on all the major conflicts. She is well into her 80s when she is reporting on the Panama invasion. And she dies almost at age almost 90 in London. There is a house with a blue plaque, if you want to see it. It's somewhere in Clapham, I think. And up until the end of her life, she was really worried that everything she did, all these novels that she written, all this reporting, that it doesn't matter because she will forever be just a footnote in Ernest Hemingway's biography. And I have to confess to you that she was, like, that's how I discovered her. She was a footnote. But this one really is for Martha. She is not a footnote. I hope that you, if you take something from this talk, you go and buy her book and read it, because she was wonderful. And with that, basically I want to be Martha when I grow up.